Hi, today we are going to revise the poem My Mother at 66, written by Kamla Das. This is a poem from your book Flamingo of Class 12th CBSE. So let's start. Before we start the revision, let me tell you the content of this video. First, we'll learn a few things about the poet. Then, I will tell you the theme of the poem. We will summarize the poem stanza-wise. I will then tell you the poetic devices used by the poet. We will critically appreciate the poem after that. Kamla Das is the poet of the poem My Mother at 66. She was born in Malabar, Kerala. She is recognized as one of India's foremost poets. Her works are known for their originality, versatility, and the indigenous flavor of the soil. Kamla Das has published many novels and short stories in English and Malayalam under the name Madhavi Kotti. Some of her works in English include the novel Alphabet of Lust, a collection of short stories, Padmavati, the Harlot and Other Stories, in addition to 5 books of poetry. She is a sensitive writer who captures the complex subtleties of human relationships in lyrical idiom. My Mother at 66 is an example. Let us now discuss the theme of the poem. The poem captures the fear of the narrator of losing her mother due to declining health and loss of energy which accompanies old age. The poet accepts this reality and is disturbed by her mother's need for her on one hand and her duties and responsibilities on the other hand. This helplessness is poignantly brought out in this poem. The emotions experienced by the poet are essentially universal in nature. The fear of losing a loved one is a theme the reader can identify with. The poem is in the form of a narrative of 14 lines written as a single sentence. This is called enjambment. The poem is written in a single sentence punctuated by commas. This highlights the streams of consciousness effect where one thought leads to another. Going ahead with the theme, the poem is based on the theme of advancing age and the fear of loss and separation associated with it. The poet undergoes a plethora of emotions when she sees her mother aging and feels the pangs of separation at the thought of losing her. She must be feeling guilty of not being able to stay with her mother in her old age. She also wishes for the lost beauty and youth of her mother. Thus, we can say guilt is one of the themes of the poem. Before we move ahead, it is important for us to read the poem carefully. I would request my listeners to notice the subtle emotions that are woven within the lyrics. Driving from my parents' home to Cochin last Friday morning, I saw my mother beside me, dozed, open-mouthed, her face ashen like that of a corpse, and realized with pain that she was as old as she looked, but soon put that thought away and looked out at young trees sprinting, the merry children spilling out of their homes. But after the airport security check, standing a few yards away, I looked again at her, worn, pale as a late winter's moon, and felt that old familiar ache, my childhood's fear. But all I said was, "See you soon, Amma." All I did was smile and smile and smile. Now we will do the synopsis. While driving from her parents' home to Cochin International Airport, Kamala Das notices her mother, who was sitting beside her, dozing with her mouth open. Her mother's face was pale like a dead body. The expression on her face was clearly one of pain, born out of fear of separation and old age. A sudden fear and pain crops up in the poet's mind, and she realizes that her mother is old now and could pass away leaving her all alone. Though the realization was alarming, it was hard to accept. In order to drive her thoughts away from the agony and pain on looking at her mother's colorless, pale face, Kamala looks outside the car. The trees racing past and the speeding car were grim reminders that time has flown by. The joyous children playing outside represent youth, energy and life. All this probably reminded of her childhood when her mother was young. After the security check at the airport, Kamala Das looks back at her mother, standing a few yards away, looking pale and grey like the winter moon. The poet senses a familiar pain, and her childhood fear of the thought of losing her mother comes back. Overcome with sorrow and fear, she bids her old mother goodbye and keeps smiling to hide her real feelings. We now begin with the critical appreciation of the poem. This confessional poem is as intense in its feeling as it is subtle in its approach. The poem engages with a plethora of mingled emotions ranging from love, pain, nostalgia, sadness, and despair. Furthermore, action and emotion are beautifully intertwined in this poem. The idea of movement is central to understanding the poem. The physical movement to the airport, the emotional journey of the poet, and the movement of her mother towards old age are all intermingled in this poem about love, longing, and separation. Notice the very first word of the poem is a verb for movement in the present continuous tense, driving from my parents' home. This transition from the stillness of the dozing mother to the frivolity and movement of youth through a single glance is simply remarkable. The literary device of contrast is used to bring out the distinctive features of the two different worlds separated by a window pane, one with the infirmity of old age and the other tinted with the frolic of youth. The device of personification used to describe the trees sprinting outside. They are likened to children, young trees sprinting, while describing their apparent movement as seen from inside the car. The merry children, on the other hand, are said to be spilling out of their homes, thus providing a fluid nature to their happy movement. The literary device used in this case describes the human subject, children, in terms of an inanimate object. Such a technique is known as chromamorphism and can be understood as being opposite of personification. The movement of the trees and children is in sharp contrast to the dozing posture of her mother. When the speaker looks at her mother standing a few yards from her at the airport security check, the mother's face is described by the simile worn pale as late winter's moon. A brilliant imagery of the winter moon is used in this part of the poem. Winter is used to evoke a sense of an ending, like the aging mother, a certain frigid, inert state, like that of a corpse, and the inevitable darkness, death, that is to follow. Also, moon has stereotypically received a feminine treatment, and the simile as a pale moon is quite apt. to describe the round, pale face of the aged mother. On seeing her mother, the poet persona experiences that familiar old ache, my childhood fear. Though she doesn't specifically state what it actually is, we can safely infer that it is the fear of losing her mother. Despite being deeply thoughtful of her mother's present and future, the speaker can neither stop herself from going away from her mother, nor can she stop her mother from going away from her forever. All she can do is part with the hope of seeing her mother again. The parting is made all the more poignant by the fact that though she hopes to see her mother, she fears that she might not. This intermingling of emotions of love, hope, longing, nostalgia, fear, and a sense of helplessness at the face of the inevitable seems to find its way in the repetition of the final words of the poem. All I did was smile and smile and smile. We are now going to revise the poetic devices or the figures of speech used by the poet. We see repetition in the last line of the poem. All I did was smile and smile and smile. The word smile is repeated by the poet. Often, the poet uses repetition in order to reinforce a thought or a feeling. We see simile when the poet compares her mother's face with that of a corpse. Later on, she also compares her mother's face to a late winter's moon. The trees are personified when they are described as sprinting. The merry children spilling out of their homes is a metaphor for energy and vigor. Winter's moon is also a symbol of death and decay. There is tautology in the phrase wan and pale, as both the words mean the same. We see alliteration in the phrase my mother and in another phrase see you soon. Well, that's all for this poem. I hope you liked it. Thank you so much. Happy reading. Bye-bye.